Today's discussion will be presented in three sections since we are recording this session for a radio broadcast on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. Feel free to post questions and comments during the session and we'll try to get them answered online. We are particularly pleased to welcome our moderator, Jason Fornicola, the Director of Custom Media for WTOP and Federal News Radio. Let me turn over the reins to Jason to begin today's discussion.
Welcome and thanks for joining us. Our guests today are Leo Garciga, the J6 Chief and Chief Technology Officer at the Joint Improvised Threat Defeat Agency, Naveen Venbar, Director of the IT Integrated Award Environment Division at the General Services Administration, John Willis, Director of Ecosystem Development at Docker, and Nirmal Mehta, Chief Technologist of the Strategic Innovation Group at Booz Allen Hamilton. Gentlemen, welcome to the discussion today. We're here to talk about the state of cloud adoption in government, and the four of you have very unique perspectives on this issue. So I'd like to get your thoughts on where we are on this issue, starting right down the line. So Leo, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I think right now we're moving along the path. I think you're watching in DoD a really good adoption, moving stuff to Mil Cloud. And really more on the IC side, moving towards C2S. So there is, I think we all recognize that there's a lot of advantages for us, and it is saving us a considerable amount of money moving in this direction. So I think DoD, it's a little bit slower going right now, but as folks look, especially on more of the business apps, we are moving in that direction very quickly. And I think long term, you'll see adoption go from where it is right now to probably 80-100%.
I think from the GSA's perspective, especially because GSA is a provider of shared services for the federal government, we're seeing a lot of demand that is not necessarily yet meeting supply. We're still working through how do we get all this stuff to people the way they want it and the way that's secured for them, that's necessary to meet all the standards of the federal government as we go forward. But I think the demand is a very heartening thing to see, that people actually want to make this move, that it's a valuable thing to them. I think it's interesting, Leo, that you mentioned sort of the cost savings. That's actually the first and primary driver that people are seeing. I think increasingly, what I'm hoping that we see is actually not just a cost saving as a driver, but a true technological revolution, right? Actually going to the cloud, not just to make it a little easier to save money on infrastructure.
John, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think it was like 2008, I got a call from a guy ran operations at JWAC, Joint Warfare Analysis Center, right? And wanted me to come down and talk about cloud for 2 days. Like, are you kidding me? Like, what the heck would you guys be doing with the cloud? And although I don't work directly in government, I've been tracking government uses, and I think there's this element of government agencies that want to move fast. And to your point, it's not about cost savings. It's about we talk a lot about today about operational efficiencies and speed. How do you get the speed, the old iron triangle of, kind of reliability versus speed? I think we've disproven that you have to do trade-offs, that you can get speed. And I think that what we're seeing with things like cloud and some of the stuff I represent, like containerization and Docker, it's about speed.
Mm-hmm. Nirmal, what are you seeing on your end?
We kind of see three groups right now. There's the early adopters, such as GSA and JIDA and other organizations that have really embraced the velocity and the kind of speed and cost savings that cloud provides. There's some fence sitters that are waiting for those organizations to move forward and kind of adopt the best practices that they're trailblazing. And then there's the server huggers, right? And the server huggers are really the core group that will get the advantages of not only cloud, but containerization, DevOps, and they have the ability to leapfrog all the way to that. It's just convincing them to come over to the green pastures of modern computing. Those organizations that are trailblazing are really key to making sure that the other organizations behind them have a great path forward to adoption of cloud. And I think that's happening. It happened in 2015, and it's steadily increasing in 2016 and beyond.
Sure, someone has to be first, right?
Right.
Someone's got to go first and try it and get it done, and then be able to show those behind them what it's like and what the benefits are, right?
Correct.
So I want to follow up, Leo, on one of the things that you mentioned, because we are going to get into this issue of those three groups that Nirmal talked about. But Leo, you mentioned MilCloud. Can you just expand upon that a little bit and tell the audience what it is and what the benefits are?
So MilCloud is an offering from DISA. It provides a capability to have infrastructure as a service to the rest of the network on both the unclass and the SIPRNet. I think the big thing to look at when you look at MilCloud, it's DoD's enterprise level cloud offering. There are other options out there too. Obviously C2S on the in the Intel community, and that's a similar offering to what DISA is doing, more towards mission type applications. But this is very much the beginning of DoD really having that enterprise capability. I think looking forward, and if you're talking to the cloud strategy group and that DoD CIO has, what we're finding is that there's a lot more options out there, and with DoD CIO really relaxing our ability to go out and use some of those providers that are available, it's a big deal, right? So we're not just looking at MilCloud or C2S as an option, but depending on what the capability is, really looking at other cloud providers that may be out there, whether it be Azure or Amazon Cloud for the unclass. I think that those are now things that are available to the whole department. I want to add one thing on the velocity thing. When we look at who's really working that bleeding edge piece, right, we're really looking at the most flexible commands that are out there. So whether it be GSA or JIDA, folks that are really there to fill a gap and whose entire purpose for being is speed. Obviously, because of that, and it's still mission intent, we're allowed that flexibility to really go out there and look at that. But we are finding that folks are kind of sitting on the fence and saying, hey, what are those lessons learned? Like, show me how you guys got there. Show me the framework you used to accredit your cloud. Show me how you did the cultural shift within your enterprise to get everybody on board. And there's a lot of folks that are still there, and some of that is just the way things work, right? So there's the Department of Defense has a way of doing business, and it takes a long time to shift sometimes. So we're really trying to get as far ahead as we can to get those lessons learned and really get everybody on board. And yeah, we'll probably make some mistakes, and it is high risk, and we're aware of that. But that's kind of the flexibility that we've been given to really get there.
It's very interesting. Naveen, something that you said that caught my eye that I think John probably piggybacked off of a little bit in some ways was this true technology revolution, right, that you talked about. Expand upon that a little bit.
So I think that goes to a couple things, right? It does go to speed. That you can actually launch new capability from within hours after you decide that you need it is a really huge and powerful thing. But more importantly, that people get the idea that you can launch like that securely, with all the tools that you need. It isn't just bare iron, right? It is more than that. It is actually a whole application framework that creates an open website within 8 hours, 4 hours. That's a new thing to folks, and that is really about why don't we shift ourselves away from the idea of it's a shift in the risk model, right? So it used to be, if I wanted to go and build a large scale system, right, I would spend $150,000, $500,000 on infrastructure, right? And so, of course, the process by which you're going to go and do that is going to take some time, right? Because you want to make sure once you've bought that infrastructure, you've bought that infrastructure, right? Whereas with the cloud, you can say, well, why don't I just go try a thing this afternoon and figure out if it works? Then we can take the next step to figure out, well, does a slightly larger thing work? And that's a very hard cultural shift for people to get in behind. And I think this is why we're also seeing this increasing rise of Agile and now DevOps falling behind it within the federal government, and those are all rapidly coming at us in a way that people are they're deer in headlights about Agile, and now DevOps and containerization are coming right along behind it.
It's very exciting. You say I'm going to try this afternoon. Like, how revolutionary, right? John, your thoughts on that? That must be very exciting from your perspective.
Where do I start? Right? No, it's funny because DevOps is a movement, for people who don't know, that started about the same time we started discussing cloud, right? The concept of cloud has been around forever, but Amazon put a stake in the ground providing this kind of utility-like service, and the whole industry kind of worked its way around it. But at the same time, there was this movement called DevOps, which was this typically the wall between Dev and Ops and infrastructure. And what happened is that thread happened in parallel with cloud and speed, and and these kind of things. And we found that there was an incredible human element to all this. And what we're now seeing, and it actually kind of bleeds into what Nimrel said, is that the fence sitters are actually going to benefit here. Because what's happening is we've seen this convergence of the human element. Like the DevOps is a human element. How do we get the culture and how do we change the way people think and work together in a collaborative way with this like incredible technology which converges? And we see this kind of movement that is half culture, half technology in a normal space. And now the fence sitters are looking in and saying, oh, well, we can actually, I get it. Because early days it was for people like your organization, which is we're able to bleed with technology. Now the general public can actually understand that they can be kind of a normal organization, not a high-tech, very fast-moving, and actually get the benefits of the human factor and the technology bleed together.
Nirmal, you talked about that in your opening statement, the pioneers, the fence sitters, and the server huggers. Talk to me a little bit more about that and then how you get those last two groups to maybe move a little more quickly.
Of course. So it's all about driving the cultural changes and with DevOps, and then also showing and proving out the cost benefits and the technological benefits and ecosystem around that with the trailblazers. Taking what has been created with those trailblazers and packaging it up, showing those other organizations that there's a very clear path forward, providing a positive feedback loop to agency or organizations like FedRAMP that are kind of approving and modernizing the services that can be created or purchased, and simplifying that path as much as possible. With these trailblazing organizations, I think there isn't many use cases that are outside of the norm that these fence hitters or server huggers can rely on to kind of defend their existing practices. A lot of these organizations are doing very advanced work, even compared to the commercial sector, and so there really is no more excuse now. At reInvent, the big takeaway was at the beginning was cloud is now inevitable. It was a kind of like 2 years ago. It was kind of we're trying it out. Some large organizations were trying it out. Now it's inevitable.
It's happening.
It's happening. So either they can kind of start to embrace that path forward, or they're going to have it kind of dictated, and there's not going to be many options left.
Naveen, I know you have some thoughts on this. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, so I think what's interesting about all of that, right, is it's about an expression of trust, right? So how do we get folks who maybe are on the on the uncertain side to trust us? But what's interesting is that the commercial world is also going to push us along in this, right? Because how many Super Bowl commercials were there about how do I buy a website for less than $15 a month that I could launch within, again, hours, right? If the public is seeing that, then there's this increasing skepticism about why the government, this large, big, huge buyer of technology, can't do something similar, right? So,
go ahead, Leo.
And I think even on the government end, I think we're watching our industry partners kind of push us. So we talked about, so you have this revolution of a new way of doing business, right, within the cloud, and then everybody shifts to agile development, and we're pushing forward right into DevOps. But even going to agile development, what we found was, right, our industry partners were there, and we're kind of catching up, right? So getting our processes in place and figuring out how that fit within our cybersecurity space. And that's the part where we're, right, what's next? Well, what's next is now we're talking things like containerization and really taking DevOps from where it is right now, which in a lot of organizations is very ad hoc, right? It's this kind of pseudo DevOps environment where you have developers really work in the DevOps piece, and there's no handoff, right? So how do you start streamlining that? I think that next step is really a technology. So now in the last 24, 36 months, we've really seen the technology mature, where we can really do automation and orchestration around these things, where before we were kind of just doing it. And we knew there were gaps, we knew there were holes, but we were making it work. So that next transformation, I think, is huge.
John, why don't you add to that?
Yeah, and I think what we've learned now. I've been participating in something called DevOps Survey. It's run by Puppet Labs and IT Revolution, and we've got the fourth year now. And what we've learned is that we're starting to see indicators that show what we consider high performance organizations, and there's two standout metrics that just show up. The difference between, or overwhelming between a high performing and a low performing. And let me take a side break here for a second. So we stopped talking about cloud. Cloud is the furniture. right? And so now we start talking about, again, that fusion of human element and technology. And what we find is there's two metrics right now to this kind of velocity. And what we need to think about as industry, and the government needs to think about this, is lead time. You know, when you see those commercials on TV, right, the reason those companies can produce those type of things, or the things we see on our iPhones, is because they understand the flow of getting from, lead time from the people who sit on a whiteboard and start sketching things out to what we call the aha to ka-ching, to like, how do you get that money, and what is that flow, and how do you automate and accelerate, and what are the tool set and the human factors that happen. So lead time, and one other one that's really important is mean time to resolve. So and that's another whole, because you talk about trust, right? We start thinking about our trust organization. How do we build resilient infrastructure? So we got, how fast are we, and how resilient are we? And when we start seeing in the high-performing organizations, the numbers are overwhelming. I'll say one last meta point, which is a high-performing organization from the survey is 168 times more reliable in their mean time to repair than a low-performing organization.
A lot of great discussion so far. I think more that we can pick up with in just a minute, but we are going to pause here for a short break. Our guests today are Leo Garciga, the J6 Chief and Chief Technology Officer at the Joint Improvised Threat Defeat Agency. Naveen Venbar, he's the Director of the IT Integrated Award Environment Division at the General Services Administration. John Willis, Director of Ecosystem Development at Docker, and Nirmal Mehta, Chief Technologist of the Strategic Innovation Group at Booz Allen Hamilton. I'm your moderator, Jason Fornicola, on Cloud in Government, Promise and Practice, sponsored by Booz Allen Hamilton on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.